The storm rolled in from the west like a beast made of thunder and dust. Lightning flashed across the open prairie, throwing shadows over the crooked sign that read Lone Creek Station. Grace Whitfield clutched her small carpetbag against her chest, trembling as the wind howled through the empty platform. She had never been this far from home, or this scared. The letter in her hand was creased and faded from reading it 100 times. It was signed Colt Maddox, rancher, age 32, honest, hardworking, seeking wife. The words had once filled her with hope. Now they filled her with dread. The train whistle echoed long and lonely, fading into silence as the engine disappeared down the tracks. She was alone until she heard boots. Heavy ones, slow, confident. A tall figure stepped out of the shadows, hat low over his eyes, rain dripping from the brim. His shoulders were massive. His coat stretched across muscles that looked carved from stone. He stopped a few feet from her, and when he spoke, his voice was low and deep, like thunder rolling through the hills. "You're smaller than I expected," he said, his gaze flicking down to her trembling hands. "But don't worry, I'll make it fit." Grace's heart stuttered. The words hit her like a slap, strange, blunt, and terrifying. She took a step back, clutching her bag tighter. I can work hard," she stammered. "I can cook clean." He cut her off with a wave of his hand. "That's not what I meant." He stepped closer, and in the dim light, she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not cruelty, but sorrow. "I meant this life. The ranch, the land. It breaks most folks, but I reckon if you've come this far, you've got some fight in you." The fear in her chest eased, just a little. Still, she didn't know what kind of man she had agreed to marry by mail. His letter had been short, practical. No promises of love. Just a proposition. You'll have a roof, food, and respect if you can handle it. And now, looking up at him, she wondered if she could. He looked like the land itself, harsh, weathered, and lonely. They rode in silence through the night, the rain turning to mist. His horse was a giant bay stallion that seemed as unyielding as its rider. Grace sat behind him, clinging to the saddle horn, her heart pounding every time the wind tore at her bonnet. When they finally reached the ranch, dawn was just breaking over the horizon. The house was sturdy but rough, logs darkened by rain, smoke curling from the chimney. He dismounted, lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, and said quietly, "Welcome home." Inside, the fire crackled. The warmth chased the chill from her bones. She stood by the hearth, unsure what to say or do. He poured her a cup of coffee, black and strong, and leaned against the wall, watching her. "You scared?" he asked. Grace hesitated. "Should I be?" He gave a faint smile, the first she'd seen. "Maybe, but not of me." There was silence again, heavy but not cruel. He pulled off his gloves, revealing scarred hands, hands that had seen too much work and too much pain. "I ain't good with words," he said, "but I keep my word. You'll be treated right here, long as you do your share and don't run when things get hard." Grace looked up, meeting his eyes. There was something in them, the flicker of kindness buried beneath years of loneliness. "I won't run," she whispered. He nodded once. "Good, then we understand each other." That night, Grace lay awake in the small bedroom he'd given her, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. She thought of her old life, the cramped boarding house, the factory air thick with dust, the way men had looked through her like she was invisible. Out here, she wasn't invisible. Out here, she mattered, even if it scared her. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard him moving downstairs. The creak of the floorboards, the faint murmur of a man talking to himself. There was sadness in his voice and something else, guilt. She wondered what ghosts haunted Colt Maddox and whether she was now one of them. The next morning, she woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. He was already outside, chopping wood barehanded, his muscles flexing with every swing. The sun caught the scar on his jaw, turning it silver. Grace watched from the window, her fear melting into curiosity. Maybe he wasn't the monster she'd imagined. Maybe he was just a man, a broken one, trying to live right in a world that didn't give much mercy. When he caught her watching, he smiled again, small, real, and rough as the land itself. "You'll do fine here," he said softly. "Might take time, but I'll make it fit." And for the first time, Grace understood. He wasn't talking about size or strength. He was talking about belonging, about making two lives, two broken pieces, fit together in a place where most things didn't survive. As the wind blew across Lone Creek, carrying the scent of cedar and dust. Grace felt something she hadn't in years: hope. 3 days after Grace arrived at Lone Creek Ranch, the land itself seemed to test her worth. The mornings were sharp with frost, and the afternoons baked the earth under a merciless sun. The ranch sprawled far beyond what her eyes could measure. Endless fences, rolling hills, and herds of restless cattle that moved like brown waves across the prairie. Colt Maddox worked from dawn to dusk, his shadow stretching long across the dirt as he rode, hammered and hauled like a man possessed. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of someone who had buried more than dreams in this land. Grace watched him sometimes from the porch, his wide shoulders cutting against the horizon, and wondered what kind of life had carved him so hard. Her own hands blistered fast. The first day she tried to haul water from the well, the rope burned her palms raw. Colt noticed, of course. He didn't scold, just took the bucket from her and said, "You're too small for that." Grace bristled at the words. "Don't tell me what I can't do," she said, jaw trembling more from pride than fear. He turned, eyes narrowing, and for a second she thought he might laugh. Instead, he nodded once. "All right then," he said quietly. "Show me." That night her arms ached so bad she could hardly lift a spoon at supper. He said nothing as she winced, only poured her another cup of coffee and pushed a small tin of salve toward her. "Rub that on your hands," he said. "It'll toughen you up faster." The tone wasn't pity, it was respect in disguise. Grace took the tin and murmured a soft thank you. He just tipped his hat as if to say, "You earned it." By the end of the week, she could carry 2 pails without flinching. The land was slowly molding her, and in that struggle, something was changing. Not just her strength, but the air between them. Colt started trusting her with small chores, feeding the horses, mending the chicken fence, cooking for the hired hand who came once a week. Each time his eyes lingered a little longer, not with possession, but with something softer, like pride. Yet she could still sense the storm inside him. At night he sat on the porch, staring into the dark fields, his face a map of memories he didn't speak of. One evening, curiosity finally got the better of her. "Colt," she said, standing by the doorframe, "why did you send for a wife?" He didn't answer right away. The wind carried the sound of coyotes in the distance, a lonely harmony to his silence. "Because I got tired of talking to ghosts," he said at last. She frowned. "Ghosts?" He nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "My brother and I built this ranch. We fought for every fence post, every head of cattle. Then one winter the fever took him. Took my folks the same year. After that I tried living like they were still here. Talking to shadows. Working till I forgot what quiet felt like. But quiet don't forget you. So I wrote that letter." His voice cracked slightly, low and raw. Didn't expect anyone to answer. Grace felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell him she understood. That she too had ghosts. Memories of hunger and cold nights in the city that never left. But she stayed silent. Sometimes words weren't needed. Sometimes just listening was enough. The next morning the storm came, a real one this time. The sky turned the color of ash and the wind screamed across the plains. Colt was already outside, tying down the corral gates when lightning split the horizon. "Get inside!" he shouted over the thunder. But Grace saw something move beyond the ridge. The faint shapes of cattle, breaking loose, panicked by the storm. Without thinking, she grabbed a lantern and ran after him. "You can't stop me," she cried as he turned toward her, rain streaming down his face. For a heartbeat, anger flared in his eyes, and then fear. "You're too small," he roared, grabbing her arm. "You'll get swept off that hill." She jerked free, her voice shaking. "Then I'll..." "Hang on tighter." What happened next burned itself into both their memories. The storm hit full force, wind like a wall of fists. They reached the ridge where the herd had broken through. Colt threw a rope around a fence post, shouting orders she could barely hear. The ground trembled with thunder and hooves. She held the lantern high, eyes stinging from the rain, guiding him as he fought to corral the animals back. When it was over, when the last cow stumbled back through the gate, Grace collapsed in the mud, gasping. Colt knelt beside her, rain running down his jaw, his breath ragged. "You're out of your mind," he muttered. But his hands trembled as he brushed the hair from her face. "You could have been killed." She smiled weakly. "Guess you made me fit after all." He froze, then laughed, a deep rusty sound that seemed to shake the storm away. For the first time since she'd met him, the weight on his shoulders lifted. He pulled her close, holding her like she was the only thing left in the world that hadn't broken. Maybe you did the fitting, Grace, he whispered. Maybe you're stronger than I ever was. When the storm finally passed, dawn broke golden and clean. The ranch stood battered but unbroken. They stood side by side watching the sunlight spill across the wet fields. Neither spoke, but everything between them had changed. Grace wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of the land. She belonged now, not because he had made room for her, but because she had claimed it. As they walked back toward the house, Colt said quietly, "You know, when I told you you were too small, I didn't mean weak. I meant this world don't always make space for kind souls. But you proved it wrong," she smiled. "Guess we both did." That evening, the firelight danced on the walls, and the house no longer felt empty. The ghosts were gone. Colt sat beside her, his hand resting near hers, not quite touching, but close enough to promise more. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and wild, but for the first time it felt like home. The narration outro for YouTube. If this story touched your heart, partner, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss the next wild ride. The next story's coming soon. Another tale of courage, love, and redemption straight from the old frontier. Stay tuned and saddle up for more.